The afternoon sun hung low over the prairie, spilling a soft gold haze across the little town of Willow Creek. The station stood quiet, its paint peeling, its benches empty except for a single woman in a wedding dress that no longer seemed to belong to her. Emma held a bouquet of wildflowers in her trembling hands, though the petals had begun to wilt, and the scent of dust and iron filled the air. Her train ticket was crumpled in her fist, but she could not bring herself to move. The whistle of the train waiting on the tracks called to her like a second chance she could not yet take. Her veil brushed against her cheek as the wind picked up, lifting the edge of her skirt. She thought of the church just a few miles away, of the guests who would still be murmuring in confusion, of the man who had ridden away on his horse before the vows could be spoken. The humiliation burned deep. She had imagined leaving this town as a bride, not a broken promise. But there she stood, alone, abandoned and half-blinded by tears. Bootsteps broke through the sound of the shifting wind. Slow, steady, purposeful. She turned, startled, and saw a man approaching from the other end of the platform. His hat shaded most of his face, but his shoulders were broad, his stride sure, and his coat carried the faint dust of a long ride. He stopped a few paces from her, his gaze steady, studying her as if searching for something beyond what he saw. Emma wiped her eyes quickly, pretending to be composed. The man's expression softened, though a shadow of sorrow passed across his features. He was older than she, perhaps in his 30s, the kind of man who had known both work and loss. His eyes were gray, not cold, but weary, and when he finally spoke, his voice came low, like gravel softened by rain. He told her he knew what it felt like to lose everything in one day. She stiffened, not wanting sympathy. He didn't sound as though he offered it. His words carried something different, a quiet strength, a steady calm. She turned her face toward the horizon, unable to bear the kindness in a stranger's tone. The man adjusted his hat and said that he wasn't there to pity her. He had come to ask for something. A strange thing to say to a woman standing in a wedding gown, heart still bruised from betrayal. She almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat when he said her name. Emma. He said it gently, as if testing whether it still belonged to her. She blinked in confusion. He explained that he had been in town to deliver a horse to the stablemaster when he saw her run from the church. People were talking, as small towns always did. He had heard enough to know her story. He told her his name was Luke Carter, owner of the Double C Ranch a few miles beyond the valley. The name rang a faint bell in her mind. The newspapers had once written about him. The millionaire cowboy who built his fortune raising cattle and breaking wild horses. But there was another story, too, a sad one, about his wife who had passed away the year before. Emma hesitated, unsure what a man like that could want from her. He said quietly that he had twin children, a boy and a girl, barely 4 years old. Since their mother's death, they had no one but him. He said he had done his best, but the nights were long, the ranch heavy with work, and the children missed a woman's warmth. His voice wavered just slightly as he admitted he was tired of hearing them cry for their mama. Emma's fingers tightened around her bouquet until the stems snapped. The sound seemed to echo in the still air. He took one step closer, then another, stopping just near enough that she could smell the leather of his coat and the faint scent of hay and smoke clinging to him. He said softly that he had been looking for someone who understood loss, someone who knew how to keep going even when everything felt gone. Emma's throat felt tight. She wanted to tell him that she was no one's savior, that she could barely hold herself together. But the look in his eyes caught her, that blend of grief and strength, that quiet plea buried beneath pride. He said he needed someone kind, someone patient, someone to help him raise his children and bring life back into their home. And then, as the train whistle blew, long and mournful, he said the words that froze her where she stood. "Please come with me. My twins need a mother." The world seemed to go silent. Only the whisper of the wind moved between them. The words hung in the air like an impossible promise. She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't teasing. He meant it. The train hissed, preparing to depart. She looked from the platform to the tracks, then back to him. He told her he wasn't asking her to marry him that very moment. He was asking her to come and see, to meet his children, to decide for herself. He said life had a way of giving second chances in the most unexpected places. She whispered that she had no home anymore, no plan, no reason to stay or to go. He said maybe that was reason enough. The bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering across the wooden planks. He bent to pick up her veil that had come loose in the wind, holding it as carefully as one might hold a bird's feather. He brushed the dust from the lace before offering it back. Their hands touched briefly, and the warmth of his skin against hers was startling, real, grounding. She asked him what kind of man brings home a stranger to raise his children. He answered that perhaps a man desperate enough to believe kindness could heal more than time ever could. She looked at him for a long moment and saw no deceit, only sincerity. The train began to move, slow at first, then faster, its wheels clattering like distant thunder. Emma stood frozen as the cars rolled past her, taking away the life she had once imagined. She realized that even if she boarded that train, she had nowhere to go. Her heart ached for something solid, something real, something that might make her feel needed again. When the last car disappeared beyond the trees, silence returned, and the only sound left was the flutter of her skirt against her legs. Luke extended his hand. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a hope he could barely contain. She looked down at his hand, then at her own. Slowly, almost without thinking, she placed her palm against his. It felt rough, strong, safe. He nodded once, a quiet promise in the gesture. And together they walked off the platform, leaving the fallen bouquet behind. The road to the ranch stretched long and empty, bordered by endless fields of wheat that shimmered beneath the fading sun. The ride was silent at first, the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves the only sound. Luke drove the wagon while she sat beside him, her dress tucked carefully around her, veil folded neatly in her lap. He spoke little, but his presence felt steady, like the land itself. She glanced at him now and then, catching the faint lines of fatigue at the corners of his eyes, the way his hands gripped the reins with quiet confidence. The horizon burned orange as dusk settled. He told her the children's names, Clara and James, and how Clara liked to sing to the horses, how James never went anywhere without his wooden toy. His voice softened whenever he mentioned them, and for the first time since the church, Emma felt something warm flicker in her chest. By the time they reached the ranch, the first stars had begun to appear. The house stood tall and wide against the night, its porch light glowing like a beacon. Two small figures ran out as the wagon stopped, a little girl with golden curls and a boy holding a wooden horse. Their laughter filled the night air. Emma felt her throat tighten as they ran straight to their father, clutching his legs, chattering about the day's adventures. Luke lifted them easily, one in each arm, and they wrapped their arms around his neck. Emma stood a few steps away, watching. The children looked at her curiously. Luke set them down gently and told them she was a friend come to visit. Clara smiled shyly, offering her a tiny wildflower she had been holding. Emma knelt to take it, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't expect. The boy, James, studied her silently before nodding, as if deciding she could stay. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and something sweet baking in the oven. She noticed small traces of a woman who had once lived there. A framed photograph, a shawl draped over a chair, an unfinished piece of embroidery. Luke caught her gaze and said that he had never been able to pack those things away. She nodded softly. Some memories were meant to remain. That night, after the children had been put to bed and the house had fallen quiet, Emma stood on the porch, looking out at the moonlight stretching across the plains. Luke joined her, standing beside her in silence. She could feel the weight of the stars, the cool breath of the wind. He said softly that she didn't have to decide tonight. She said she already had. He turned to her then, surprise flickering in his eyes. She said she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she wanted to stay, at least long enough to help the children smile again. Luke exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried months of held-back pain. He nodded once, and for the first time, his shoulders seemed to ease. Days turned to weeks. Emma learned the rhythm of the ranch, the sound of hooves before dawn, the laughter of the twins as they chased chickens in the yard, the way Luke's voice carried across the fields when he called the cattle home. She began to cook, to read stories to the children, to hum while hanging laundry beneath the open sky. She found herself laughing again, a sound she thought she'd forgotten.